Just going to say, if you have the completed funeral planner and you'd like to turn it in, there's a stand back there and a little sign. You can put it there, and I'll make sure it gets to the right person. Also, if you weren't here last week and you want the materials that were handed out, there are the extra folders back there from the presentation last weekend with Mr. Rick Knazer and Pastor Jerry Ewings, which was helpful. I hope you found it helpful. It really just put before me, like, oh, I got to do those things. and some important things that you really can't wait, because if you wait until you need them, then it's too late. So that information is back there. There are also extra funeral planners back there. If you took one and misplaced it, it will do you no good. And so I would encourage you to take another one, and we'll keep printing them until you have it completed, I guess. So those are just some of the housekeeping things to take care of. The handout is on another stand. We have all sorts of things back there. And it should say, attending the dying and grieving the dead on the top. If you haven't grabbed one, this would be a good time to do so, although most of it will be on the screen as well this morning. I think we'll get started, and people filter in as they filter in. That's fine. So let's begin with prayer. Lord Jesus, as we tackle a tough topic today, we know that without you, this would be an impossible task. But with you, we find peace for our troubled hearts and hope that is real, hope that is rooted in your resurrection and the promise that those who die in you have life with you now. Fill us with that same hope for our own grieving and our own, as we consider our own death, that we would do so with the confidence that only you can grant. We begin our study in your name. Amen. This is a tough topic, and quite honestly, as I was putting it together, I thought, man, these would be things that we should avoid talking about, but not, because when are we going to talk about it if we don't do it here? So attending the dying and grieving the dead, probably not something you've thought about much. Maybe you have, I don't know. It's one of those things that, speaking with Pastor Mollenhauer, even in our seminary training, I don't know that we had a lot of training in what this would look like. Obviously, there is the hands-on or the experience that's helpful, but I'm going to share some things that hopefully you find helpful, and also draw on your experience today as we talk about these two things. And it really is these two elements. Just as a poll, now I added a third one here. You might be able to check. I've been at the bedside of someone who is dying. I have grieved, or really the present tense is more appropriate, am grieving the death of a loved one. And if you say, I can't really check any of those, not that you haven't had people in your life that have died, but perhaps it hasn't been someone so close to you that their loss was particularly challenging to you. And so I added a third. I will probably do both of the above at some point. And likely, if you haven't checked the first two, the third one is likely. Especially the grieving of the loss of a loved one, very likely. And I'm curious, as we talk about being with those who are dying, how common of an experience that would be for people in our modern world, and certainly looking at, as Christians, what that would entail or what we would want to do. I want to keep something in mind as we have this in this topic, and it's something that might seem obvious to all of us, but I think it's worth stating out loud. Death is not just a medical process. And to understand that when you go to a hospital, or when you're talking about death, the potential of death with the doctor, or hospice care, really it is about the physical process of dying, keeping you comfortable as you are dying, or as your loved one is dying. That's their goal. And that's a good goal. That's their lane. It's a good lane for them. But it's not the only part of the person. And as we consider the spiritual side of death and dying, that's where we look to God's word, and we see there is so much to say. And just understand that if we don't take this as an initiative, who's going to? Certainly hospitals do have chaplains and things like that. But looking at it as the whole person, body and soul, how do we attend those who are dying, grieve the dead? a word on what I mean by attending the dying. I don't know if that's probably not common way of talking. When you say something enough times, it sounds normal to you. Well, I don't know how normal that is. So just a thought on this. The reality is we don't always have an opportunity to be at the bedside of someone who is dying. Obviously, death comes in all sorts of different experiences or different circumstances. So if a person would die suddenly, my grandfather died from a heart attack, and that was it. And actually, both of my grandfathers did. So pretty good odds that's going to happen to me. But that being said, there's some blessing there, obviously, that they were taken quickly. At the same time, there wasn't this attending of the dying that we're going to be spending more time with today. There could be circumstances where medical interventions keep the family from being near the dying. I think of this last year, and everything that we're saying today is pretty much undone by the circumstances of COVID, at least the shutdowns of last March and through much of last year, where those who were in the hospital and perhaps even dying often had to die alone or with an iPad. What a hard thing. And no one liked it. I understand that this wasn't enjoyable for anyone, but what a tremendous cross to be in that circumstance. And even without COVID, there are times where a person might be in ICU, and there would be limited guests who can go in and be with that person, or so much going on in terms of the medical care that it's hard to be around that person, or even it can be hard because of the medical circumstances. Distance might keep us from being with someone who's dying. Obviously, if they're across town, that's not a problem. If they're across the country, now you're talking about jumping in an airplane and hoping you get there on time. If they're across the world, again, there's going to be different circumstances. At the same time, and this is the premise, if at all possible, we don't want people to have to die alone. That's the premise as we go through. Now, looking at a couple of scripture passages that speak about it, they're on your sheet as well. The first one is just an example of death in the Bible. And in Genesis chapter 49, you have the death of Jacob being described. When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up into bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. It almost seems like Jacob had control over when he was going to die. And you might remember in the book of Genesis, he has all these things to say to each son, a blessing and a curse. And then it's like, well, my time is done, so I'll be gathered to my people. But the point was, he was surrounded by his family, surrounded by his sons, and he died in their presence. I think of Psalm 23, that is certainly familiar to all of us. And obviously it's speaking about our good shepherd. It's speaking about God. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And of course, the you are with me is that God would be with us. But how does God with us? Wherever two or three are gathered, absolutely. But doesn't he also come alongside us through the mouth of another Christian who comes and brings God's word and God's comfort to us? How is God with you? Well, in his word. And how does his word come to you? It comes from the outside. It comes through a messenger. And that doesn't have to be a pastor, but the idea that when you're walking through that valley of the shadow of death, you want someone there with you. This is not a place you want to be alone. And obviously the Lord is always there, but he also sends us to be with those who are in their dying moments. And I think this comes out in the next passage, Matthew 25. This is Jesus' words at the end. Of course, he's talking about the judgment, the sheep and the goats. And remember how that works. He separates them, and then he says, he says to those on his right, when I was hungry, you fed me, all these things. And then he says, I was sick and you looked after me, right? So Jesus says, I was sick and you looked after me. And the believers respond, when did we see you sick and go to visit you? Again, it just shows you that as Christians, when we go to be with those who are sick, to be with those who are dying, we're going to be with Jesus, he says. That what you do to those who are sick or perhaps even dying, you do to me. And that's a part of the Christian life that comes I would hope. Naturally, we would want this for those who are in those last moments. Then the last one actually comes from our lesson today in church from the book of James. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And certainly this is not just talking about being at the bedside of someone who is dying, but a widow in her distress. Who is more alone than an orphan or a widow? And when would a widow find perhaps the most distress? To be such a isolated, might be at the end of her life. And so to look after widows in their distress. That is part of what our faith will look like. I have this little note on your sheet. We don't always have an opportunity to visit the dying, but we don't want people to have to die alone. I think I already shared that with you. I want to go to the next thought. This is going to be something that just put yourself in the position and let's see what we can come up with in a minute or two. Imagine your own death. Your health has been in decline and the doctors have decided there is nothing more they can do. Hospice care has been arranged and medical intervention is now focused on keeping you comfortable instead of treating an illness, which, by the way, is what hospice is. Hospice is not, we're giving up, it's not you're on your deathbed necessarily. It just means that we're changing our treatment. Instead of trying to treat whatever it is that's ailing you, we're now going to aim to keep you comfortable. It's a shift in treatment, not necessarily, you have a month to live now, you're on hospice, or something like that. Although I think that's the connotation most people have when it comes to hospice. It's a matter of treatment. What would you want from your family, friends, pastors in your last days and last moments? Think of 3 things. So do that on your own. You can chat with someone near you. Let's see what we can come up with. Take a minute, and what would you want from your pastors, your friends, your family in those last days, maybe moments? What do you suppose you would want? Anyone think of something that...
You want them nearby.
Yeah. Dan said we want them near. And maybe if there's anything that you take away from today and you ask, how do I show Christian love to someone who is dying? And time again, everything I read and heard, the most important thing is your presence. Don't worry about what you're going to say. Don't worry about, are you going to be in the way? Or, obviously, if it's not a close family or friend, you probably can be considerate of those things. But I'm talking about someone that you have a relationship where your presence would be of comfort to them. All right? You'd want them near you. Yeah. What else? Lois? Yeah. Lois said, hearing God's word read to you. Yeah. And this is, in some ways, now answering the question, when you are there, what do you do? What does being present mean? Hearing God's word read. Yeah. This is helpful for me too, by the way. Anyone else? Yeah, Beth.
I want to hear about what they're doing just as their life continues. Focus on what's happening in their life.
All right. So Beth said, I want to hear what others are doing in their life. In other words, not like they're pretending it's normal, but it's not, you don't want it just to be about you. You want to be rejoicing in their joys and things like that as well. Anyone else? Yeah, Calico. Sure. Reminiscing might be sharing a story or a memory or even some photos. Yeah. Yeah, Jim. Reassurance. Yeah. So reassurance, I'm assuming you don't want someone to come and tell you you're going to pull through. And that's one of the tricky things, is that family often think that they are loving their loved one, they're loving the dying, by withholding the truth from them, as if we don't tell them that they're dying, we won't make them upset. But in fact, that's not helpful or truly loving. And to be able to put that before them in a way that they begin to accept or to at least grapple with it is really part of the process. Ruth, do you have a thought? Yeah, so Ruth was talking about her experience with your mom and with your husband, and being able to touch. Don't be afraid to touch the person. That human touch is part of your presence. And then, Ruth, you mentioned almost just a reassurance you can go. Oftentimes, when a person is dying, they're not necessarily, when they have faith in Christ, they're not necessarily worried about them, but they are concerned about the loving and giving permission, so to speak. Not that they need permission, but just giving them that permission. You can go when God calls you. Yeah. Yeah, when it's time that they know that you want them to go to be with their Lord. Obviously, this is a situation, a scenario where I ask you to imagine your own death. And I wonder if you've been there when it comes to the death of a loved one. As a pastor, like I mentioned, I didn't have a lot of experience with this, and I would say the circumstances are very different every individual, obviously, but when it comes to that moment, at least I remember one specifically. His name was Jerry Lederman, and it was just a beautiful experience to be with him and with his family as he drew close to his end. And it was beautiful not because obviously what was happening was in any way beautiful, but that is the dying process is not a beautiful thing, but the peace and the peace of not only the dying but the living that comes from Christ. This is something that is an experience that I hope that if you are ever in the position to be with someone that is close to you and is dying, that you would not shy away for fear of death. Because as Christians, we have something greater than death itself. Of course, we have the promise of life. We're going to walk through just very briefly what dying looks like obviously this doesn't always go this way, but there is a process. If someone is drawing near to the end and it doesn't happen suddenly, this would be an example of someone whose decline is a steady decline, doesn't die of a heart attack, but might be what happens oftentimes in a place like a grace hospice care, or when someone is in their home and is declining. There's a process, and like I said, it is not uniform in any way. These are generalities, and I'm sharing it with you because, well, if you haven't experienced it, you just don't know what to expect, and it's helpful to at least have thought about it and anticipating what that would be like for your loved ones someday. So some people talk about stages, and I added it. I don't know. Stage 1, the time for important conversations and reconciliation. I jumped ahead. So this would be the situation that someone is still lucid. They're still able to interact, and yet they are now transitioning from fighting to live, now preparing to die. You'll notice a loss of energy. The person might sleep more. There might be all sorts of feelings of anger, fear, guilt, or even relief, and they might want to get their life and relationships in order. So this is really when it's the most important time to be there, as far as your ability to interact with the person. Anyone who's in the medical profession will be able to say more or less where a person is in this, but this would be a time for the important conversations and perhaps reconciliation. If there's something that you have held on to and you want to get off your chest, it would be an appropriate time. Obviously, for the sake of the dying, not for your sake, and just understand that the time might be short. It's a time to examine relationships with loved ones and with God. A good time for family and friends to come and say goodbye. Obviously, we don't ever know how much time a person has, and yet don't wait until the end is imminent before you would come, especially if you're not necessarily within the closest circle with this individual. If you're a close friend, perhaps, and not part of the family, you might want to go in, and at this time, you might not be there as death draws nearer. And I'll say this again and again, but the pastor wants to be contacted, not for his sake, but that he might serve the dying and the living. And if there's any question, please don't hesitate to call your pastor, whether it's night or day. These are important things. I remember it happened more in California than it does here, at least to me, maybe because there's two pastors here. But I had phone calls like 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning where I would go to visit or go to be with the family right before church, which always was a little exciting. But the point is, your pastors do want to be there and serve the dying and the family. After stage 2 would sometimes be called active dying. Whoops. And again, this is hard stuff, but I just want us to grapple with it a little bit so that we might be prepared in some small way. The dying experiences labored breathing, swift changes in body temperature, increased periods of sleepiness, irregular breathing, gasping and sighing. Congestion may result in a death rattle, changes in appetite or thirst. There might be difficulty in swallowing, maybe incoherent or appear to be reliving experiences from the past. Again, you'll notice, and especially those who are experienced, the hospice nurses or the medical staff will notice these things as well, these changes. And if you've never been with someone who's dying, they can cause a lot of concern. And what I read was usually the concern is, from our perspective, the living and the dying are not concerned that their breath is particularly challenged. That's something that we observe and maybe get concerned about. Another thing about food, someone might say, well, they're not eating, and that's because they don't want to. And they're not going to die from starvation. And so sometimes family members can get upset with the medical staff saying, they're not eating, you need to feed them, thinking that they're going to preserve their life and keep them alive if they only have another bowl of Cheerios or whatever. And the fact is, the body does not want more. The body is now shutting down. And so part of that is don't have an interest in food or perhaps drink, although they do typically give something to keep the mouth wet. What can we say about the stage 2? About if you're there, again, I just mentioned that someone might be asking, what's happening to me? There might be increased confusion or agitation. Sometimes this is a medicine, and I'll just say that people, because of medication or other circumstances, might say things that are not in line with their character and can be a little bit concerning to the family. Like this Christian man suddenly starts swearing, and the family thinks, oh no, as they draw close to death, they're going to die in this state of swearing and therefore be lost to eternity, because this is not. And again, sometimes medication can cause these things. Otherwise, the hallucinations and things that might be happening to the individual. Don't be concerned. I know sometimes they can be a little bit nasty with the staff, and it's not in line with their character, and you feel bad because that's not who they are. Trust me. And they might sleep a long time. And those who are attending, this is the question of the family. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? Do I just sit here and wait? And the answer is, Yes. If you're able to, yes, you do. You stay there with them, or you have family that can share the burden. But that's exactly what you do. Your presence is not helpful only when they are alert and cognizant of your presence. Oops. The dying process and the moment of death, obviously the moment of death comes when breathing changes and then suddenly stops and the body lies still and the soul has departed. And there is a stillness that is there. If you've been with someone who's dying, you know what I mean. That it's obvious that the person is now, their soul has departed and their body lies now an empty shell. And that is something that, again, I don't know how many of us experience. And if we do, it can be a jarring thing, but it also can be a very peaceful thing, again, when you realize that this person is now, their soul has been to be with the Lord. What to do then? You can obviously make staff aware, but also be okay with not rushing. You don't have to rush to move to the next thing. You can spend time with the body, and the pastor has a devotion that he can do with the family if you'd like the pastor to be there and share God's word of comfort in that moment. And then if there's someone who's good at organizing and communicating, obviously those are all parts of the details that have to get worked out as far as funeral plans and things like that, but they'll get taken care of. Don't feel like you have to rush if you're there in that part of that moment. Now I'm going to just share a couple of things, what to do if you are there. And these came up in our discussion. So what do you do? Just being present, I think that we mentioned that a number of times now. And sometimes it's called keeping watch or vigiling with the person. That is what you get to do, to be with that person so that they don't have to die alone. Obviously, it doesn't always work out. Don't feel bad if you went home to get rest and then they died that night and you weren't there. Sometimes that can really be a tremendous guilt that someone carries. I wasn't there when mom died, and don't feel like their soul depends on you in every way, but if you can, to be there is important. Sit quietly with the dying. Human touch is important. And these are things that we talked about. Read scriptures, sing hymns. That one I really like. I think of hymns as old friends. And who do you want to be there when you are dying? You know, you could put on the new Christian radio and whatever. Someone might like that, but I don't know. I kind of want these old friends to come visit me. These old hymns that have been part of my entire life and now would be there to bring comfort there at the end of my life. Praying, and if you have music that the person liked, obviously that can be part of it. This can get to the point where people are setting up candles and burning incense and all sorts of things, which are, they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. I did see, making space or creating privacy if possible. That can be difficult in certain circumstances. Turn off the TV, and if you're going to use your smartphone, do it outside the room. Don't sit there, texting or whatever. I guess sometimes you have to, but playing video games or whatever on your smartphone. Some things to bring: a Bible, a hymnal, music, paper, and a pen, just to jot things down that come to you. I think a Bible and a hymnal would be two things that I'd really recommend bringing, because sometimes you want to do something together, especially with other people, and what brings you together with others more than singing a hymn or reading scripture together? And this is the other thing I want to make sure that sticks in your mind, even if the person appears to be unresponsive and you think, well, what's the point? They're sleeping. You don't know what they will hear. And so treat them as if they were fully aware and could respond. Talk to them, hold their hand, speak to them as you did when they were vibrant, and that's what you can do. Don't be afraid of them. All right? You're not going to catch it. You already have it. So be with them, present both physically and with your words. I'm just throwing stuff at you, and maybe some of it will stick or it'll come back to you when you're in that moment, or something you might share with family as you consider your own death. Tell them what you would like if you get to choose. Obviously, not everyone gets to choose, but what you would like them to do when you are in that place. What blessings does God give the dying through the presence of loved ones at their bedside? What is the blessing that we get to give to those who are dying?
You get to say your final goodbye. I love you. Goodbye.
All right, the affirmation of love from those whom they have loved, whom God has blessed through their life. Yeah? Steve?
You can confess your faith
Yeah.
to them and say, I'm ready to go home.
Yeah. To be able to encourage and to speak the faith to them. What more could we do? We rejoice anytime we get to proclaim God's word, but in the moment of death, or as death draws near, to be able to point the dying to the ultimate finish line of their faith, to cross that line. What a blessing to be part of that, and to have been part of this person's life. Absolutely. Anyone else? It's hard to say. Again, we can't go back and interview the dying and say, what worked for you? What was good? This is always from the perspective of the living. But that being said, I think there's no question that these are ways we get to bless those who are dying as we attend them. How about this one? In your experience, what blessings does God give the living when they attend the dying? What is the blessing of being part of that? And I'll say, just as a pastor, I consider this to be one of the perks of being a pastor, is being with people in every stage of life. What are the blessings that you receive when you attend the dying? Yeah, to know.
You get to spend time with your siblings, and that you probably don't get to do that often.
Okay, if you have a family, let's say you're with a parent who's dying, typically the family comes together, and that's a special part of your relationship. Hadn't thought about that. Good. Steve?
Well, you see the fulfillment just had it in mind. Be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give you a crown of life.
Sure.
You see that fulfillment, that they've been faithful, they're confessing it to you as a living, and you believe in God's promise that they're going on to live forever with you.
Yeah, to be there when they cross the finish line, so to speak. You're quoting Revelation. Be faithful, and I know the NIV, be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. And to be with them, attending them to that moment when they're receiving their crown as a soul being brought to their Savior's side. What a blessing, yeah. Anyone else, just on your experience, if you've, Dwayne? I don't know if I should repeat that, Dwayne. Yeah. I'm not going to repeat that, Dwayne, because I know you're tongue-in-cheek. Anyone else? You know, it gets recorded on YouTube forever, so. Linda?
I think in my own personal opinion, it was comforting to me. It helped me to see that final end, how peaceful it was. It was a blessing to me.
Yeah. And so Linda just said it helped me to be there at the end. And that really is helpful for what we're going to talk about next, which is grieving. When that person is gone, to have been with them is something that's helpful then as you grieve. Yeah, to not have regrets. No one wants to live with regret, and it's not helpful. Now, we all manage to do so one way or another. We're going to find a way to live with regret, I know, but to do what we can to have been present. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, Jim. Yeah, when you get to be there with this person that you have loved, perhaps one of the closest people that God has given you, And it's what you get to do for them as they now leave this world. What a privilege and a blessing. And like Jesus said, you did this to me, right? You did this to me. That alone should make us just be filled with joy that we get to serve Jesus himself as we serve and be with those who are dying. Anyone else? What other blessings? Anything else that comes to mind? Yeah, Steve.
Well, I think it's an opportunity to perhaps reorder your own life
Yeah.
as a blessing that you never know when our hour is up.
That's right. Yeah, to be with the dying, to not be afraid of seeing death, helps you to live. And we have 2 more classes after this one. Next week we'll talk about the resurrection, which is a great thing. And then the last Sunday of our study will be looking at how all of this, confronting death, actually is what frees us to live. And there's really no way to be confronted with death more than to be around the dying. And I know that that's something that I walk away with when I'm near those who are getting close to death or maybe perhaps even dying. That's me. If I think I'm not going to get there, I'm fooling myself. And that's me. Now, how does that impact my living as I consider someone else's last moments? Yeah, Pastor Reedy.
I was with quite a few people, even at the moment of death for many years, and at first it really shocked me kind of how peaceful it was for the Christians to die. I don't know why I thought it would be screaming or something when I was younger. And it is comforting for a Christian even to see the comfort that we have through Christ even in death.
Yeah. Yeah, the peace would be something that is not just intellectually, a concept in our mind, but like Simeon says, I now depart in peace. Right? I now depart in peace. And I mean, honestly, it might not be the case that a person departs in peace, even as a Christian. Physically, they might be not in peace, but they'll have peace in their death because it's peace that is tied to Christ. And if anything matters, it is that, right? That we have this peace that is ours in Jesus. And attending the dying is a way that God intends for us to learn the peace that is ours in Him. And I certainly believe that as God puts us into families and surrounds us with people we love, it's not just so that we can do the fun things in life with them, it's that also we would be with them in the hard things in life and ourselves shaped by that experience and prepared and drawn closer to our Lord Jesus as we get to serve people in their last moments. What questions do you have about attending the dying? That's the end of this section. Yeah, Dwayne. Yeah, so Dwayne just said that being with the person helps with, what's the word you used? Makes the reality of death a personal experience. That is, you were there and you saw them depart. You don't have this disconnect between they were here last time I saw them and now they're gone. And if you're present at that moment, that's part of your own experience. Yeah. We don't know when God calls a person home, and obviously, if we could time it, we would do so. That's the question everyone has. How long do they have? How long do they have? How long will it be? And the nurses or the doctors, they can never know for certain. They look at signs, and I mentioned some of them, but nothing is scientific or automatic. There are things we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about people on life support. I don't know if that's been any of your experience, but that can be a challenge where a family has this decision to make to take a person off of life support. And often what surprises them is that they're taken off of life support and then they don't immediately die. And people expect that that this is a, you're and essentially ending their life as soon as well, not necessarily. That would be another challenge or another wrinkle to all this. Yeah, Dan?
Pastor, have you ever attended someone dying who was not at peace, was fighting it, was
Yeah. So talking about the dying process is helpful, I think, because certainly people throughout the process might have periods of agitation or questions. I've been with Christians who have suddenly been struck by doubt, but this was before they neared the end and were comforted by the promises of God and the promises of their baptism. As far as at the end, I have not been someone who showed agitation all the way to the end. Oftentimes, they do give morphine to keep them comfortable, which can induce a sort of kind of a, I don't know, comatose state almost, where the person is very much at peace as far as you can see. And I'll be honest too, I think fewer and fewer people invite the pastor anymore. The circumstance I talked about with this man, Jerry, well, it was a blessing. All of his children, all of his adult children were faithful Christians. And so having the pastor there was not an inconvenience or a strange thing. But if you have a family where you have, mom and dad are faithful Christians, but none of the kids particularly care about and might even feel threatened by the presence of a pastor, it becomes more difficult on my end to be there and to know that I'm wanted or to even be called in the first place. And so my experience is that it's not, the vigiling isn't always what happens at the end, and it's very much family dependent. So we're gonna talk now about grieving, and again, this is something that is a reality for all of us. We might not ever be able to attend the bedside of the dying. We might not have the opportunity. Someone might be taken from us before we have that chance. Other circumstances might keep us from that. But grieving is something that we all likely will do at some point if we are not already grieving. So we'll move on to this topic of Christian grieving. And I'm not going to claim to be an expert here, only to say, what we can say. First, sharing some scripture that speaks about it. We've read this passage a number of times in this class, and I think it speaks most specifically to the fact that there is a distinction between the grieving of a Christian and the grieving of someone who does not have the hope that we do. Paul writes, "Brothers, we do not want you to be ignorant about those who fall asleep, or to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. We believe that Jesus died and rose again, and so we believe that God will bring with Jesus those who have fallen asleep in him. Therefore, encourage each other with these words." There's a hope that is ours that makes our grieving different. At the same time, where this verse comes from, the context. Jesus is called to be, Lazarus is dying, and Jesus delays. By the time he gets there, Lazarus is dead, and Jesus goes and visits the sisters. And then this verse, Jesus wept, which I don't know if it's ever crossed your mind. Why is he weeping when he knows he's going to bring the guy back? I think it shows us that the loss is real. And I put this up there simply to reinforce the fact that if our Lord Jesus, who has power over death, who, if anyone understands they're going to be with me forever in heaven, or in this case, I'm going to raise this guy from the dead, and yet he wept. That when we think of grieving, we ought not think that this means there is no sense of loss or no sadness. Yeah, Linda.
I love that verse because it gives a Christian the okay to grieve.
Yeah.
A lot of times people, well, you're a Christian, right?
Yeah.
Think you're not supposed to show that emotion. I've always loved that because it's like, it's okay to have that grieving.
Yeah, Linda just said she loves this because it gives permission for the Christian to grieve. And we'll talk about that in a moment. I think you're absolutely right. Romans 12 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. There is a time, I mean, we could talk about Ecclesiastes, but there's this time that we would mourn with those who are mourning. That's certainly the loss of a loved one would include one of those moments. And Psalm 88 is one of these psalms that he pours out his heart as he wrestles with loss. And we don't know exactly what the loss is, but what he says to God, you have taken my companions and loved ones from me, and the darkness is my closest friend. That Christians would experience deep darkness even does not mean you are not a Christian, but rather this is can be the experience of some who grieve in such a way. This is kind of the question that you already got to, Linda. Paul urges Christians not to grieve like the rest of men who have no hope. How would you respond? A person who believes in Jesus has no reason to grieve, since the departed one, loved one, is with the Lord. I think we already kind of answered it.
There's a country western song that says, I'm not crying for you, I'm crying for me.
Okay.
So that you're not crying for the person who's
Yeah.
departed, but I'm crying for me because it's now I have love.
Yeah, I'm not crying for you, but I'm crying for me. The loss is real, which is another way of saying the love was real, right? Why do we experience loss? It's because we've experienced love. And that when that person, their presence is taken from us, while we have the eternal hope and the sure hope of the resurrection, we'll talk about that next week for sure, and we believe it with all of our hearts, and yet the loss is still real, and that loss hurts. Anyone else want to respond to that? Or has anyone experienced that yourself, saying, am I allowed to do this? Does that show a show of lack of faith if I would grieve? Or maybe the opposite is, does it show a strong faith if I don't? Right? I would just say it's not a true statement that Christians, because they believe in heaven and the resurrection, that therefore they don't grieve. We're going to talk just briefly about grieving, and I want to draw on your experience first. If you have lost a loved one, what would you want others to know about grieving? Before I share some things that I gathered, but I want to draw on your experience first. Danelle?
There isn't a right way or a wrong way to grieve.
Okay.
Everybody does it differently.
Yeah, I think that's important. There's not a right way. There's not a wrong way. Everyone is very different. Yeah. Robin?
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
There's no concrete start or finish. You will go through it one way, 1 year, and a different way, a different way.
Yeah.
It's just going to be a continual process.
I think that's something that needs to be said out loud, which is it is ongoing. You don't get to the end of the grieving time and then imagine as if this will never affect you again. And I'll share a quote about that. Steve?
Well, yeah, some people, it doesn't hit them right away, and then all of a sudden, weeks or days, weeks, months, and all of a sudden there'll be a circumstance that'll remind you of the person.
Yeah.
It may not be you, it may be your loved one. All of a sudden, he or she starts crying, and what's the matter? Well, and then you have to show empathy to that person. They may have been very strong right after that, and it hits at different times.
Yeah, that grieving or the sense of loss might sink in at different times, and that it's not always predictable. How many of you have ever cried in church because you were singing a hymn that reminded you of someone that is, that was their favorite hymn or a hymn? Yeah, and we might see that in church, and someone is crying, and well, in that moment, that particular hymn, it's not a matter of, I don't like this hymn, it's more a matter of, this hymn brings me great joy. I was talking to someone this week who said that when she sings certain hymns, she hears her husband singing the hymn, even though he's with his Lord, and so that brings not so much grief as it brings, or sadness, but as it brings joy, but joy that would that might make one emotional in those things that are touch points and continually reminders of the loss, the loved one. Anyone else want to yeah. 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 Don't make assumptions about how someone, whether they want to or don't want to. And this is the hard thing about how do we support those who grieve. How do we, we'll even talk about what do you say at a funeral. So these are the things that I think we'll wrestle with to one degree or another, and we always will. A couple things. I think we'll hold that question. It'll be brought up as we go through some things. I'm just throwing out some points. Something that I took from Kirsten, who helped me out with this, and her training. Christians grieve. Grieving will look different for each person. So this is something that you ought to expect. It's not a strange or a fact that, or evidence that you are lacking faith if at the loss of a loved one you grieve. It is evidence that you had someone you loved who is no longer there with you. Yeah, Beth.
I think it's important to respect the way somebody grieves. My family tried to force me to talk about things.
Yeah.
It was like the worst things.
Yeah, to respect someone where they're at and not to think you know what's best for them at any moment. It won't work anyways to yeah. There'll be a theme that comes out and that's, in some ways, it's knowing each other too, because everyone is very different, and someone might be looking to talk, and if you think, well, they don't want to talk, they might take that as almost they're not open to hearing. Others, like you just said, Beth, aren't ready to yet, and that's okay. So what we tend to do is then say, okay, I'm not going to do anything. I don't want to do the wrong thing, so I'm going to do nothing, which is a challenge. This is a quote that I think is helpful. The reality is that you will grieve forever. You will not get over the loss of a loved one. You will learn to live with it. You will heal and you will rebuild yourself around the loss you have suffered. You will be whole again, but you will not be whole again, but you will be whole again, but you will never be the same, nor should you be the same, nor would you want to. And the only word I would change is the forever, because of course it isn't forever that we will grieve. And the book of Revelation points us ahead to the place where there are no tears or sorrow, as all of God's people are brought into the presence of Him. The second thing, there's no one right way. I think Danelle mentioned this. This will look different for every individual, and so as we consider that, realize your grief might not look like your brother's grief or your sister's grief or your friend's grief, and that's okay. The third one, there's no that your grief does not mean you don't have enough faith. Maybe that one is the one that, as Christians, we might not be anticipating. Feelings of anger, feelings of loss or being lost, and that you grieve does not indicate your faith is weak or that you are somehow deficient. Give yourself time and permission to feel your grief. Use your support system and trust that with time, grief gets lighter to carry. Your pastors are always available too, and want to be helpful to you as you grieve. How do we support those who grieve? Here's some things, and again, you have to know the person, but support the grieving by showing up even if you don't know what to say. What I mean by that is, like at a funeral. Sometimes people will avoid funerals because they really don't know what to say. What do I say? And your presence is what matters more than anything. Even if you don't know what to say, don't pretend like it's up to you to fix it with something that you're going to say. You can, unfortunately, say the wrong thing that will stick with the person. And sometimes like saying, I know what you're going through when you don't know what they're going through. Don't say that. But you certainly can say, I don't know what to say. He was, even saying that is more helpful than saying things that aren't true. Don't avoid them or treat them differently. Don't treat them like they're diseased and now you have to avoid them. I did talk to someone who said this was something that she struggled with when her husband died, that some friends, it seemed, wanted to avoid her. And maybe it was in their attempt to give her space, but she interpreted it as something was wrong. So don't treat them differently. Obviously, give them space if they want it. But again, I'll say it requires some sense of knowing the person. Be prepared to follow up. So a funeral is part of the grieving process. And then it's not as if this person goes home and everything's hunky-dory. That loss will likely sink in for the rest of their life. And especially that first year, and especially at moments when that person would otherwise have been present. Today, Mother's Day might be for some people a very difficult day, especially if it was this past year or recently that their mother passed away. And acknowledge that. This is a hard thing. It could be birthdays, it could be anniversaries, it could be other events, holidays can be very hard for people who have lost loved ones. And be prepared for that, but also how can we support those who are grieving? This is something that it's kind of a generality. It's not necessarily only for when someone is grieving. It's all right to say, let me know if there's anything I can do. But they're never going to do that. Just realize that if you say that, they're never going to call you, because that would require being able to think very, very, I don't want to say rationally, and to put you in a position of, I have to take the initiative. If you want to help someone, know that person, first of all, and think of something that would be helpful and then offer to do it. And if they don't want it, then they can say no, but they're saying no to something specific. Or say, when can I bring you dinner this week? And they might say, well, there's a dinner train or whatever, a meal train set up at church. That would be the most helpful thing to me. Or, if you really know the person, I'm stopping by with coffee. I'm going to do this thing for you. And maybe just stopping by with coffee might give them the opportunity, if they want to talk about it. Or they'll say, thank you, that's really thoughtful. And the point is, if you can do something specific, that's truly helpful. All right, we are almost out of time. What thoughts or questions do you have on this topic of grieving or on attending the dying before we close with our hymn? Any other observations, thoughts, experiences that would be helpful to the group? I realize that today was more just throwing stuff at you, and perhaps it was something that you can relate to personally because of experiences you've had. Otherwise, something to tuck away in your back pocket and be prepared for that day when it becomes your reality. Yeah, Dan.
This is not on what we were just talking about. The very first verse, about Jacob's death, Moses wrote, he was gathered to his people. We don't say that. I don't know how that was said in the Old Testament. Yeah,
Dan is just mentioning that in the book of Genesis, and I think it's beyond the book of Genesis, that he was gathered to his people, a euphemism for dying. And this, in some ways, it bears the ancient thought of you going to be with your those who have gone before you. To be gathered to your people is to go to be with those who have gone before you in some way.
You kind of touched on it, but don't be afraid to mention that person's name in your conversation. I have a good friend who lost some child.
Yeah.
And it hurt her more. People danced around her name instead of just, it would have been Kristen's birthday today, thinking of you. Or, it's been a long time since she lost her, but she still wants people to recognize that she was here.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's helpful. Linda just said, don't be afraid to mention the person's name. It's not the unmentionable now, the unspeakable, or to dance around the reality that this was a person, is a person, right? And that's helpful. Yeah. We're going to close with, I need you to pull out the hymnal. We're going to close today singing 391, stanza 5. So it's God loved the world so that he gave, and we'll sing stanza 5. All right? I'll try with the, is that an F? All right. When you are sick, when death draws near, this truth your troubled heart can cheer. Christ Jesus saves my soul from death. This is the anchor of my faith. Good. Thank you. One example of a beautiful hymn that would be very appropriate to sing with someone in their dying days. Next week we'll turn to the resurrection, and as we do so, it's with this knowledge that the resurrection as Christians has always been the hope. It's where we're going, and I don't know that we talk about it as much as we can. We think of heaven, but we sometimes divorce that from the resurrection. So we'll dig into the resurrection as we draw end to our discussion about death. Have a blessed week in our Lord.